I could feel very high.
The introductory season of what would become the last of the old Trek shows is now over, meaning it's time to sift the tea leaves and try to make sense of it all. Jonathan Archer, a terrible model painter turned starship captain, is in charge of Earth's very first Warp 5 capable ship, the NX-01 or Enterprise. In true Starfleet fashion, the label Warp 5 capable is only technically true, in the same way that humans can technically eat arsenic. Still, it's a fancy new toy for we backwards humans of the 22nd century, and that means we're very proud of it. So proud, in fact, that we ignored the advice of our far more experienced and frequently condescending mates, the Vulcans. A crashed Klingon ship on Earth gave us the chance to act as a galactic taxi service, something that would become a regular occurrence for Starfleet of the future. And what better ship to use than our fastest? I mean, okay, it's not actually ready yet, but testing is for nerds. At least the Vulcans managed to wangle putting one of their own on the ship to keep an eye on us. Waiting for the guns to be installed before leaving would probably have been useful. During our maiden voyage, we got ambushed by the same unknown assailants who were chasing our Klingon passenger, and who subsequently kidnapped him from us. Archer's a Starfleet captain, though, and that means chasing after the buggers to nick him back. Q learning about a species called the Suliban, and specifically a faction of them called the Cabal, who are up to some proper dodgy time-fuckery stuff. With our potential ongoing antagonist established, we nick the Klingon back, deliver him to Kronos, and are rewarded with not being murdered, which is pretty polite for the Klingons. The unexpected, and frankly undeserved, success of this mission gave us bragging rights to carry on faffing around in space. Cue a variety of shenanigans in standard Star Trek fashion, only this time with a low-tech coat of paint and humans whose experience of the galaxy is far less than we viewers are used to. We don't even have a prime directive to ignore yet. That's the basic premise set out, so let's take a look at the people we'll be following and what happened to them during our first year on tour. Jonathan Archer's the son of an engineer, one of the people responsible for developing a Warp 5 engine, in fact. Nepotism is positively encouraged in Starfleet, which is at least part of the reason he came to be in charge of the ship we strapped those engines on first. This whole situation came about after much dissuasion from the Vulcans, though, and he was left with a deep-seated feeling that we humans are being deliberately held back. It's an opinion shared by many humans, and not without cause, but having a Vulcan officer on his crew has helped him overcome that bias. Sometimes, for some Vulcans. Besides this, he's engaged in the standard captain fare of going on multiple dangerous away missions with his most critical crew. He's made some friends, made some enemies, interfered in the affairs of other species, and sometimes even resisted the urge to interfere. In some respects, Archer's a microcosm of humanity itself, slowly starting to understand that our desire to learn more needs to be tempered by the caution we were advised to adopt before we left. The Vulcan High Command has sufficient sway over humanity of the 22nd century that a suggestion of T'Pol to act as science officer was accepted. Whilst initially cautious of her, the naysayers of the crew have been proven wrong, and she's become a respected and valued member. Attempts at placements on human vessels have been tried before, and none lasted more than a few weeks, but T'Pol's been sticking at it for months now. A fair portion of this, and probably her acceptance by the crew, might be due to the fact that she's not the average Vulcan. She isn't as bound by tradition or societal expectations as evidenced by calling off an arranged marriage, and she's willing to examine things considered forbidden, or strongly discouraged at least, such as exploration of emotions. The original purpose of her placement might have been to act as restraint, and she's certainly tried to be that sometimes, but she's also been willing to judge we humans on our own merits. Ironically, that behaviour has convinced Archer to consider his own actions more than any amount of pompous preaching ever would. The chief engineer of the Enterprise is a simple man who knows his own mind, which is a nice way of saying he doesn't always consider the wider picture before acting. Charles Trip Tucker III was our spotlight showcase for human interference in the series premiere, attempting to insert himself into a situation he didn't understand based on his own preconceptions. His intentions may have been good, but the result was T'Pol needing to explain that the kid he was trying to rescue needed nothing of the sort, and all he did was make himself look like an ignorant twat. As a means of showing we viewers that assumptions are dangerous, it was quite effective. Besides this, he's been the sidekick of Archer for a number of his shenanigans, when he wasn't busy getting M-pregged or robbed during a night on the pull anyway. Our officer in charge of kabooming things, Malcolm Reed, is also a strong candidate for being the founding member of the NX-01's Shit Parent Support Group, a father who could be described as reserved at best or a massive wanker at worst may be part of the reason why Reed is so reserved and struggles with interpersonal relationships. In short, Reed is the oddball of the humans, though considers the crew of the Enterprise the first group with whom he's actually felt a connection. Cue the parallels with neurodivergence and found family that we've seen before in a number of other Trek shows, and that might have wider-reaching implications for the sorts of people who write science fiction for a living. Impressive polyglot Hoshi Sato is our means for understanding other species, which makes it kind of a shame that the concept is largely ignored once the people behind the scenes decide it's a pain in the arse. It doesn't take long for our universal translators, a tech that's supposed to be somewhat unreliable at this point, to function perfectly fine unless the story needs a speed bump. To be fair, that's probably the best of a bad lot, as needing her to translate on every mission would limit the activity of the other main cast members. Good ideas on paper don't always prove to be viable as an ongoing thing. Still, Hoshi's shown herself to be one of the more interesting characters as, unlike everybody else here, she's actually got a healthy self-preservation instinct. All of this exploring dangerous situations shit is very much not her strong point, and that's useful for both character growth and showing that Starfleet of this time is nowhere near as polished as it will become. Travis Mayweather is our resident space baby, born on a freighter and living most of his life in a metal box surrounded by death. That makes him the most experienced lad on the ship, despite being an ensign, and a pretty good shout for a pilot as well. He also gives us a chance to look at how our species has already started to fragment in the 100 years since the advent of viable space travel. Boomers, or those who spend their lives on ships, are communities made independent by necessity, and that insular nature is averse to change. The prospect of humans adopting ever faster tech is not always a welcome one to those who define themselves by the journey, not the destination. Having one of their own be a poster boy for it all complicates things further still. Besides a single backstory episode, though, Travis got the smallest amount of attention from the writers. He's the wide-eyed and green ensign, eager to please and prove himself, but that also means he's struggled to find a direction of his own. The Enterprise's main medical lad was an unplanned addition, nicked from an exchange program because he was experienced with alien biology, and because he was within eyesight when Archer realized his ship needed a doctor. Phlox is denobulin, a species not referenced in any prior shows, and that raises an issue with prequels. How do you insert something new into a universe that's had literally hundreds of stories set after the ones you're writing now? The answer is to not address it at all and just get on with things, which is probably preferable to any other option. If there's one thing Trek fans excel at, it's making shit up in their heads. Phlox himself has been somewhat of an ethical yardstick for the ship. For as much as he's tried to help the psychological well-being of the crew, he's also been willing to step in when he sees something wrong. Sometimes this has been simply demonstrating that a human norm is not a galactic norm. Sometimes it was explaining that both actions and inactions have consequences. And when necessary, it's been from exerting his authority and simply refusing to comply. You could even argue he's one of the most moral doctors we've seen in any Star Trek show, purely from the fact that he hasn't yet boffed one of his patients. Enterprise launched to the promise of being a different kind of Trek show, so much so that even the reference to Star Trek was removed from the title. Despite this attempt to distance itself to create a delineation in the minds of the viewers, we still get a lot of what you'd expect based on the shows which came before. I don't just mean the Trek template of meet, alien, discover, problem, fix problem either, but also in the variable quality of what's on offer. If there's one constant in Trek, it's the inconsistency, and you'd struggle to argue Enterprise is any different. But then perhaps those are both unfair judgments. I've often used this particular cudgel against various Trek shows, but maybe it's simply an unavoidable byproduct of wanting self-contained ideas from a variety of writers. Prophets know Babylon 5 and SG-1 had their own share of dips, and that's a finger you can point at pretty much any show that leans towards an episodic approach. Even The Prisoner, a personal favourite of mine, had a couple of duffers. Whatever the reason, it's still fair to say there are low points here. Unexpected is probably the nadir as far as I'm concerned, the entire premise hanging on the idea that an unwanted pregnancy is funny as long as it happens to a man. I'm still not sure if this constitutes sexual assault or just grievous bodily harm, as we have no data on whether this is a sexual act for her. She described it as something friends do, but we don't know the context of those words. What we do know is it's not sexual reproduction in the way that we humans understand it, at least from a purely biological viewpoint, because there was no combining of cells. Does that make it better? Of course not. In fact, it arguably makes things worse. Proceeding with the story because you simply didn't understand the implications is one thing. Deliberately obfuscating things to try and turn a very serious situation into a comedy is quite another. The story does not pass the gender swap test in any way, shape, or form, and I think the people who made it had enough self-awareness to realize this. That approach to questionable decisions isn't isolated, though, as the whole Berman goo chamber thing is notorious for how poorly it was received. As gratuitous as it is tasteless, the close zooms of smearing goop on naked skin are regularly held up as one of the best examples of Trek missing the mark. The whole thing was widely mocked even back then, and rightly so. The first season isn't a total shit show, though, despite some missteps in the pursuit of ratings. The choice to make humanity's erstwhile staunch allies the Vulcans into an antagonist of sorts is inspired. I know there were some viewers who disliked the idea of Vulcans being anything but what we've already seen, but I personally feel that rather ignores the point of a different setting. We're here to show how things have progressed, and learning that oldie-timey Vulcans were a bunch of secretive pricks who weren't above spying certainly gives room to watch the growth of a fan favourite. If you wanted to see them be better than that, then, well, you already had 4 other old Trek series to do so. Similarly, the use of time fuckery as an enemy dodges the problem of how to make a threat big enough to matter, whilst also explaining why it's something we've not heard in other shows. My opinion of the average temporal shenanigans story is well known, but Enterprise has so far avoided making its stories irrelevant through using the big red reset button. And those temporal shenanigans are where we end the season. Archer's caught up in things he doesn't really understand, and stuck in a now buggered future with no way back. Enterprise has laid some strong foundations upon which to build, and the writers felt able to end the first season on a cliffhanger, which is something we hadn't seen in any prior Trek setting. Whether that displays confidence in the show itself, or simply knowing how much the executives at Paramount wanted another multi-season series, is something I'll let you decide. It's thank you time again, and the names you see to the left of the screen are those of people who throw cash my way to fund this utter bloody shambles. I regularly say this wouldn't be possible without them, but that's particularly true of late. For those unaware, I've been having a bit of a time recently, and the channel's patrons have been nothing but superb about it. My unending thanks to them all. And also my thanks to you, shower of nerds here on YouTube, who were equally delightful about the news I'm having to cut back on regular videos to 1 a week. I know it's not the news you wanted, but I appreciate you not being dicks about it. At least to my face. End of summary.